Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from the Awesome Health Podcast. And yes, it's another episode brought to you by Bioptimizers. And I am pumped. I'm excited. I'm ready to go run a marathon today. And the reason why I'm going to tell you that is because we have none other than Brian Keane joining us today. And we just were on his podcast last week. And I was like, man, I can't wait to have him on our podcast because Brian is the best-selling author of the book, The Fitness Mindset, and currently travels the world as a professional speaker. He also hosts the #1 podcast, the Brian Keane Podcast. Now, here's the thing. He's a former primary schools teacher turned fitness entrepreneur. And after retiring from the world of professional fitness modeling in 2015, he now does ultra endurance events all around the world. What is ultra endurance? Well, let me give you some ideas if you want to get inside the mindset and just smash what you think is possible. This gentleman has ran the famous Marathon Des Sables, which is, or some people say Des Sables, depending on how you pronounce it. But bottom line, it entails 6 self-sufficient back-to-back marathons through the Sahara Desert in Morocco. And if that's not enough, if it wasn't hot enough, he says, no, I can do this in cold weather. And he ran 230 kilometers through the Arctic Circle in the northernmost tip of Sweden. Of course, he documents all these adventures. Don't believe me, go check out his social media channels where you can see all this stuff. But the bottom line is he talks about a lot of things. He's into muscle hack. He's into biohacking. He talks about a system that he calls BKF90 fat loss and muscle building program, which helps people improve sleep quality, energy levels through diet, nutrition, and short duration, high intensity training sessions. So, of course, his interest lies, and we kind of connected on this, human psychology, because let me tell you, if you're going to run through the desert and run through the Arctic, you better have the right mindset. And that's what inspired him to write the book. So, Brian, welcome to the show.
Wade, what an introduction. My goodness. I'm like talking about bringing the energy. I'm all about this. Let's do it.
Yeah, man. Well, listen, first off, you have an amazing story. So before we get into the absolute stuff that I'm fascinated with, like, where is your mind going in these things? Give us a little bit of background of your journey and how you decided that you were going to get, like, where did you get started? Where are you from? How's that going? And how did you get to the point? It's like, yeah, man, I'm going to run an endurance marathon through the desert for 6 days.
So I'll try and keep it somewhat short because my story is, it kind of goes off in a lot of different directions into the point where I pivoted into the world of endurance. So I grew up in the west of Ireland. So as country can be, I grew up on a farm. I put a lot of any muscle that I built, my arms, my shoulders were all down to lugging stuff around on a farm as a kid. And when I was 12 or 13, I started lifting weights. And it was mainly for football at the time. So I played GAA, which is the national sport in Ireland. It's like a combination between rugby, basketball, and American football. So I grew up playing that sport. So I started lifting weights at 13. My 16th birthday was a gym membership. So I was always kind of into health and fitness and wellness and everything along those lines. And then I kind of came out of it a little bit over the kind of my early 20s. So I became a primary school teacher. I went to college for 4 years. Got my undergraduate, then did 1 year postgraduate in London to become a primary school teacher. And I worked as a primary school teacher for 4 years, Wade. And I did nothing up until about the age of 24, 25. Wow. I didn't do anything in the world of health, nothing in the world of fitness. I had no social media, I had no podcasts, I had nothing along those lines. But what happened in terms of how I pivoted into fitness was I was studying for 4 years, did the 5th year for a postgraduate. I had been working to become a teacher for years. It's all I thought I wanted to do. I'm like from a family of teachers. You know, my dad is a farmer, but my mom and her side were all teachers. And I was an hour into my first day of teaching, landed my first job, and I'm like, this isn't what I want to do. I'm like, this isn't what I want to do. I'm like, I've spent the last 5 years studying. I've been working towards this goal. I'm like, this isn't what I want to do.
Wow.
And I remember sitting and having that moment. And the analogy I normally use is I felt like I was at the top of a ladder, but it was against the wrong wall. And I was contemplating over the next couple of years. I stayed in my job working in London as a teacher, but I came home that Christmas about 4 months, 5 months into my first teaching job. And I remember asking my mom, I'm like, I absolutely hate what I'm doing. I hate my job. I'm like, I really don't enjoy teaching. I'm like, this isn't what I'm supposed to do. And she asked me something that I've put to so many people since on my podcast and books across platforms. And she asked me a question. She goes, what would you do for free? And I thought about that. And I'm like, I would do something in fitness. I was like, I would do something in a gym. I would do something like that for free. She goes, well, why don't you do that? And that was kind of the start of that journey. So I went back to London that January after Christmas, was working my teaching job, but was studying to become a personal trainer at nighttime. So I spent a year studying part-time, working full-time, and then got my personal training cert, got all my certificates, strength and conditioning, sports nutrition, and started working with clients in the evening. So for 2 years in London, I worked as a primary school teacher during the day, and I worked as a personal trainer at nighttime. And then in 2014, I had decided that, okay, this is what I want to do. I was like, I absolutely love this world of health and fitness and everything to do with that. So I decided I was going to move back home. I moved back in with my mum and dad. My sister gave me her crappy little Toyota Yaris, one of those cars that you didn't know what it started every morning. And I had to leave an hour early for work every morning in case my car wouldn't start and I'd have to get a lift into work. So that was the start of 2014. And where my fitness journey kind of started was I was trying to get a personal training business off the ground in the west of Ireland when nobody knew who I was. So I jumped onto social media. I'd heard about Instagram. I'd heard about Facebook. So I jumped on these platforms. And one thing that was going to separate me that other people weren't doing in my locality at the time was I decided, I'm going to do a bodybuilding show. I'm going to do a fitness modeling show. So I know this is your background. This is your bread and butter. I didn't get as lean as you, but I did okay. I've seen your photos and they're crazy. But I did a fitness modeling show. So in 2014, I went into the world of fitness modeling and did really well in that. I came fourth in my first show, and that opened a load of doors. I had loads of photographers and a load of magazines and things coming to me. So for 2 years, all I effectively did was work as a personal trainer during the day, did fitness modeling shoots all around the world, very similar to what I do now with the speaking. I would travel around for photo shoots and I would do competitions. And then in 2015, my daughter was born. So I was prepping for the Worlds in Las Vegas at the time, the WBFF Worlds. It's a fitness modeling competition. And my daughter was born a couple of months before that. And I remember thinking, one of the things you said when you were on the podcast that connected deeply with me was, you talked about the rebound on the back of a show and how you went from, Mr. Universe to Mr. Marshmallow Man. And I remember what was happening to me was I was kind of rebounding up and down off the back of shows, and I wasn't feeling very good. And I struggled personality type, as we'll probably get into later, with balance. It's something I'd have to constantly work on. I can go all in on things. But I remember thinking when I was prepping for the Worlds, my daughter was a couple of months old, and I'm like, I can't keep doing this. I was like, I can't have a young kid at home and be traveling around the world and doing these shows. I'm like, it's just too much. So in 2015, I did my last show. I came 8th in the world in Las Vegas. So I hit my goal. The goal was to hopefully try and crack the top 10. And I'm like, okay, I'm done. And then there was nothing until 2017. In 2017, I went to what was a Tony Robbins Business Mastery in Amsterdam. It was a big, massive expo, a lot of jumping around. But
it's amazing.
It was life-changing. But I met a guy over there. His name was Tom Otten, who I've since become a very good friend with. And he was telling me about this race in the desert. He was like, he goes, I've done this race in the desert where it's 6 back-to-back marathons. I was like, hold on, what? I'm like, it's back-to-back marathons? He was like, yeah, it's called Marathon Des Sables. And he started telling me these stories about in Marathon Des Sables, it's all self-sufficient. So you have to have all your food on your back. You carry everything with you. It's literally you rock up to the Sahara and you've got 6 days. You run 6 back-to-back marathons and you hope that everything stays intact and nothing breaks and you get through. So he was telling me these stories and he goes, oh yeah. He goes, you need to have a venom pump within arm's reach at all times because of, in case a snake bites you. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, that is fascinating. And I remember I missed the entire next speaker after he was telling me about this race because I was on Google searching Marathon Des Sables. And then a weird thing happened, Wade. I left that seminar, that conference. I stayed connected with Tom. And that was in April, May of 2017. And I remember thinking that Marathon Des Sables would be really cool to do. And then what happened was something that happens to a lot of people is that voice came in and said, you are not a runner. you can't do that. And I remember having this really awkward moment with myself because I was on social media. I was telling people, you know, that push yourself out of your comfort zone, you know, make sure you do things that make you more self-disciplined. And then I'm like, oh, here you are. Push is coming to shove and you're doing the complete opposite. So that was my moment. I'm like, okay, I have to just sign up for this thing. So at this point, I had never ran a marathon. I had never run. My background was in strength and conditioning. I played GA, I played sport, and then I went into bodybuilding. So I was quite a big guy. You know, I'm still quite a big guy. Like I'm 5'8", built like a hobbit. Like I'm not really built to run marathons. So I signed up to that race, and I remember waiting. I'll never forget this day till the day I die. It was in August 2017. And I was like, okay, I'm going to start running. So I did my normal push workout. I did chest, shoulders, triceps. And then I went onto the treadmill. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a run. I did 2 kilometers on the treadmill and I nearly got sick. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this was August 2017. Marathon Des Sables was April 2018. So it was several months away. And I remember sitting in the dressing room thinking, oh my God, you have to run 6 back-to-back marathons. You feel sick after 2 kilometers. And I was really disheartened. I felt really downtrodden. And then I got that little bit of a pep, you know, that picked me up. I'm like, okay. I'm like, let's chunk this down. Let's break this down. I'm like, there's no point worrying about running 6 back-to-back marathons if I can't run 1. So I'm like, that's my focus. I'm like, I'll put a focus on running a marathon. So I signed up to the Dubai Marathon in 2018, which would have been 4 months before Marathon Des Sables. And I said, okay, I'm going to put all my energy, all my effort towards running a single marathon, pyramid of prioritization. So I did that, landed out to Dubai, did it in a hoodie and I did it in a backpack just to kind of make it a little bit harder. And I came through that quite comfortably. And then I rocked up to the Sahara in April, got through it. You know, we can break it down and chunk it down more, and got through it. But when I left the Sahara, because it was so difficult at that point in time, before the Arctic, because the Arctic was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But up until that point, the Sahara was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. I left the Sahara away and I was like, okay, I'm like, where are the other limitations in my life? I'm like, I never dreamed in a million years I'd be able to do this. And it came back and I felt so much stronger. Like my relationships were better. My anxiety levels were better. My business was thriving because you just had a complete mindset shift. Like it felt like a part of you died in the Sahara and a stronger part came back. Like, you know, that with the universe shows, like you do these things that really push you to your limit and you're a different person when you come out the other side. And that's how I felt. And then I was kind of hooked after that. And then 2019, ran to the Arctic. Again, what happened in the Arctic, and we can get into this as well, but just to give it a little bit of a backstory and a little bit of a seeding or an anchor, is I got torn my Achilles 86 kilometers from the end in the Arctic. So I ran the last 86 kilometers on a torn Achilles. So I couldn't walk for 3 months when I came home. So that was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, still to this day. So now when things like COVID and the world's all over the place, I'm like, no, it's still better than tearing your Achilles in the Arctic. I'm like, you know, you have a lovely kind of comparison point there. And then most recently in February, I ran a 100-mile ultramarathon. That was the longest single day ultra I ran, just, you know, running as fast as you can, point A to point B. And now I spend my time doing podcasts, creating content online, staying on top of my fitness, training for multiple things at the minute, but everything keeps getting cancelled. But yeah, that's the kind of the long, I was going to say the short version, but it's the long version of the world of fitness, and just a little bit of a synopsis on what got me there.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. There's a couple of really great points I want to illustrate before we dive into. And, you know, one of the things I think that Tony Robbins talks about, and I think he says, if you want a better life, ask better questions. And I think that in today's world, a lot of people are and this is the opportunity of the COVID situation. If there was ever a time for people to reinvent themselves, this is it. Because so much of the world is upside down. It's safe. It's totally safe. Hey, you know what? I decided my job's done. The business, everybody's like, I get it. COVID happened. Nothing's the same. So the greatest opportunity that people have right now is the opportunity to reinvent yourself. But I love the fact that your mom asked, what would you do for free? And Matt and I talked about this because we try to find superstars when we hire in our company. And it's like, we always ask the question is, what would you be doing on a Saturday night? Like, are you reading? What are you researching? What are you talking about? What are you interested? Where is that going? And if a person is just sucked into entertainment, then the chances of them having a meaningful life is very low. But there's another thing that you kind of, when you started off, what I think is another really important is, even though you weren't happy with what you were doing, you started a side hustle, right? You started to dive into it, and you're doing a side hustle. And then, you know, as I see you transferring, there's a side hustle component. And so I think a lot of people, when they're starting out, aren't willing to recognize is that, hey, if you want to make a break from your current career, what you're currently doing, you're going to have to put in some extra times. Before we get into the running stuff, what was the drivers? Like, how did you unpack that to kind of, you know, make that break? And also having to suffer the social consequences. You had to move back home. You had to drive a crappy car. You moved away from a career that you had worked hard for. And of course, I'm sure there were people in like, what are you doing? And all that sort of stuff. Can you unpack what drove you through, I would say, the long, cold nights in that transfer, that shift?
Well, it's a funny one. It's a great question, Wade, and I'm going to expand into the nitty gritty of it. Like, the thing that kept me going for those 2 years. Now, it's funny. It's very similar to, you know, contest prep. I think you know this definitely, and some people listening, that you look back on things and go, how did I do that? Like, but at the time, you want something so bad, you're so focused on it, you're willing to do anything to make it work. Mm-hmm. And the thing that kept me going in the evenings, on the long, cold evenings, because I remember, like, I went broke 3 times away trying to get my business off the ground initially. Yep. Like, the last time when I made it a success, I had to take clients in the park in London because I couldn't afford my gym rent. Like, that there was low points during that, because I tried to leave a teaching job. Like, I made 3 attempts at it, and it wasn't until the 3rd attempt that I made a success of it. When I moved back in 2014, I tried to do it twice in London. Like, I went complete flat broke once. Like, there was one point, and I'll never forget, like, it's my anchor and contrast point anytime I'm ever stressing or worried about money. Like, I'm very fortunate. I make a very good living doing what I do. But I remember in 2013, the 2nd attempt, I was broke. I paid my rent to live in my place in London, and I paid my gym rent, but I had no money. It got to the point that I had to go down the back of my couch in London to get money for the bus so I could get to the bank, so I could take out a loan so that I could pay the rent for the following month. And that was a super, super low point. But I remember even during that, and I went back teaching, doing the day job, every time I got paid to work with somebody one-to-one in the park, I'm like, I can't believe I got paid for this. Like, that's how that felt. That's when I knew. And when I was doing it, now it took me 2 years. Like, I'm not going to say it was an overnight, you know, made the jump. Mm-hmm. It took me 2 years to get from the point that I had the courage to be honest, most of it was down to, I was worried what people would say. And I did get a lot of negative comments. Family members, friends, they were like, you're an idiot. They're like, what are you doing studying all these years, you know, sunk cost fallacy, leaving a job that, you know, pays well. In Ireland, it pays well. The UK, not so much. Long holidays. I'm like, what are you doing to do this fitness thing? And I was like, by the time I got home, I knew that I could live on very little. So even the fact that I had no money and I loved what I was doing, I'm like, I did the thought experiment. I'm like, would I rather get paid 100,000 a year as a teacher, or would I rather get paid 20,000 euro a year as a personal trainer? And I was like, well, I'd rather get paid 20,000 a year as a personal trainer. You know, ironically, you know, you can earn significantly more as a trainer than you can't as a teacher. But that thought experiment helped me. And when I was grinding through, that feeling of, I can't believe I get paid for this, never went away. And it never went away. Even when I was at my most successful in one-to-one PT before I transitioned online, I still get those moments where I'm like, I can't believe I get paid for this. When I'm speaking, doing different talks, like, because I love what I do, but that comes down to having a contrast. Like, I don't want to sound like super positive, you know, go, positive all the time. I'm like, the reason I'm positive about the things I do and I love what I do is because it was a time when I wasn't. Like, I was like, I hated my job. Like, the questioning, like, what's the point? You know, why am I here? Feeling hollow, feeling unfulfilled. So now the only difference now is I have a contrast point. And that's why I'm like, well, I remember what it was like to feel that way. And now when you don't have that, you're like, oh, things are amazing. So over the space of a couple of years, I made that transition out. And to be honest, once you're able to disconnect from the opinions of other people, you'd be shocked at how far you can get in whatever it is you want to do.
So true. And I think a lot of people in today's world are, I would say they've become soft in that the world has become so convenient and easy that we've lost the confidence that's built from doing things that are very difficult. And a lot of people will rationalize their choices and project them onto you as opinions of what people should do. But there's a third piece to this. And every person that I've ever met that has been wildly successful, famous, successful, you know, all these things that you see on the front side of the social media stuff, have gone through this extremely dark period where they get to a point where they're just like, never again. Like that's the low point. For me, I remember tree planting in Northern Ontario and my car blowing up and getting hypothermia and being eaten by bugs every day. And it was this horrible moment. And it was a very difficult thing that I did when I was 18 years old, turning 19 years old. And once I got through that, and it was miserable, it was just absolute, the worst thing ever. But I remember coming out of that and I was like, okay, that's the worst it's going to be. Do you know what I mean? And then there were areas in my life and business, such as yourself, where, hey, you know, it was really tough and things were really bad, you know, but I always had this frame of reference. Well, I got through that and I could go through this. And I think today's world that people need to do things that are very difficult and then also find their passion, because we have to live this life. Why live for a life of comfortable misery for 30, 40, 50 years as an adult, or uncomfortable joy? Which leads me to my next question. What is the kind of discomfort that you experience? And you can kind of contrast running a marathon, six marathons in a row in the blazing heat of the Moroccan desert and the Sahara Desert versus running 230 kilometers and what, 86, did you say, kilometers with the torn Achilles?
Yeah.
How did you do that? Like what's going on? What's going on in your head in the desert? And then I want you to kind of contrast that with the thing, because I think there's something you're tapping into here that's beyond the physicality. Tell me what that is.
But that's the thing. Like people generally will ask questions like, you know, how can you do 6 back-to-back marathons, or how can you run 230 kilometers through the Arctic, or how do you run 100 miles without stopping and going straight through? And the truth is, particularly with the marathons is a good example. I'm like, your body's broken after one. I'm like, you're like, all the other 5 is all mental. Like your body is absolutely broken after that first 26.2 miles. So everything after that normally comes down to your mindset and comes down to your head.
When you say broken, what do you mean? Like, so what's going on with you physically?
As in broken, like you're so physically sore. Like anyone that's ever ran a marathon will tell you how sore they are the next day. Like for the next week, you know, for some people it's, you know, multiple weeks, and your body is just sore. It's stiff. Like the last thing you want to go and do is run another marathon. So, but that's where I think the growth comes from, because it's so mental. And yeah, you can do all the physical training, and I'm not going to lie, like I trained hard for those events. Like anything I sign up to, I put in the work. Like I'll get up in the morning, I'll grind it out. Like I put in the work. But there's only so much you can do because you're tapping into something mental after that. Like the Sahara, what I got so much from the Sahara, it was very different to the Arctic. Like when I came out of the Sahara, I felt like all the limitations I had just been dissipated. I felt like I was living in a different world. Like that's how I felt when I came out of the Sahara. I didn't get that in the Arctic. In the Arctic, I had a very different association with pain. When I left the Arctic, and even for the months after it, I had a completely different relationship with pain. I remember coming back from the Arctic thinking, I can handle any pain that comes my way. Like when I tore my Achilles, and I remember talking to because the way the Arctic works, and I'll double back between the two races. I'll go Sahara
Please
and
do.
the Arctic.
I love it.
But in the Arctic, yeah. So in the Arctic, the way it works is that they have help with the local indigenous Sami tribe. So they're a local reindeer tribe. So they set up teepees and they'll heat your water, because obviously the water in the Arctic it freezes. So you need somebody there. They'll dig a hole in the ice and they'll boil the water, and then they'll give you water when you come by. It's really, really cool. But I remember there was a doctor in one of the teepees, and she was a UK doctor. She was an English doctor there with the other people that were running through. And she was like, look, your Achilles could rupture. And I remember thinking at the time, if it ruptures, it ruptures. I'm like, fine. I'm like, if it goes, it's gone. Like, it's silly, because when I say it in hindsight, looking back, it sounds stupid, but you're in this zone, you're in this place. Like you're not like, and that's not to say push through pain, push through barriers. I'm like, in any other condition, training session, normal marathon, I would have tapped out. I'd be like, all right, Achilles is torn, you take one step back for two steps forward. But you're in a completely different mindset when you're in the Arctic. Like, you're in that fight or flight zone. Like, the thing with the Arctic, you're in such a state of high anxiety nearly all the time, because the problem with the Arctic compared to the Sahara, and the reason it was so much more difficult, was in the Sahara, if you got tired, you could take a break. Like, you could slow down, you could walk, you could sit on a stone, you could take a break. You can't do that in the Arctic. Like, in the Arctic, you have to keep moving to keep your core temperature high. So if your core temperature drops, you're at risk of hypothermia, and if you go too fast, or your core temperature drops, you're at risk of frostbite. But if your core temperature goes too high and you start sweating, you're at risk of hypothermia. So you're in this kind of Goldilocks, trying to stay in this Goldilocks zone the whole time. So you're never off. You're just in this space of just survival. Whereas the Sahara, as hard as it was at the time, you could take a break. If you were really struggling after, 10 miles, you could take a breather, you could take a break, whereas you just couldn't do that in the Arctic. So in terms of the mental benefit I got from both, that you get from both, and this is relative. Like, this isn't to say run to the Sahara, run to the Arctic. Like, Wade, you'd have got something similar with the bodybuilding shows. Like, it's very, very similar. It's discipline. It's conditioning yourself to do something you need to do, whether you feel like it or not. And that's what your training will represent, and that's what the event will represent. And that's relative. That's a 5K for somebody else. That's a 10K for somebody else. That's a marathon for somebody else. That's a physique show for somebody else. It's so relative. But in terms of what you need to build, and what I got from it was, when I did the Sahara, on the third night. So the way the Sahara works, as I mentioned, it's self-sufficient. So everything's on your back. You literally have to take full control. If you lose your food or anything,
how much weight would you be carrying with you?
So because I went out there, and considering now I was coming from a bodybuilding background, and I was all about, I did my list of things. What could stop me? I love the Charlie Munger quote, tell me where I'm going to die and I just won't go there. So I was like, right, what could stop me finishing this race? And one of the things for me was fuel. I'm like, if I run out of food, I can't fuel my body, because I'm one of the bigger guys, like 85 kilos. Like, right. I don't look like a marathon runner by any stretch. And I looked even less like one when I was in the Sahara. So I needed to fuel my body. I still had all my bodybuilding muscle, when I was out there. So I had my food. So my bag, most people's bags was about 7-8 kilos. Mine was 13.5. So but I could carry that. Like, one of the advantages of being a bigger guy with muscle was I can carry 13.5 kilos on my back, no bother. Like, that's not a problem for me. Whereas somebody that's 60 kilos, that's, 10, 20% of their weight, like, it's right. A problem for those people. So there's strengths and, there's pros and cons to being a bigger guy and having that. I'm very good with muscle glycogen, replenishing glycogen, like, and I understand the nutrition. Like, when I used to compete in bodybuilding, I was all about carb cycling. So I had a really good understanding of carbohydrate and how that affected the body, depletion, when I was feeling depleted, exactly what I felt like mentally when I was depleted. So as soon as that happened in the Sahara, I'm like, okay,
right, you're able to self-monitor to keep your biochemistry online. And I think a lot of people who've gone through bodybuilding competitions have a huge advantage in self-observation about those things that you see the visual effects and you're so on the edge. So that's very interesting that there was a carryover in the endurance. That's fascinating.
Oh yeah. Well, the thing is it's so funny, because one of the reasons that I'm so good with the sports nutrition, now obviously sports nutrition is my background as well, but there's nothing like self-experimentation.
Correct.
Nothing like it. So when I went into the world of ultra endurance, I got when I switched into fat adaptation, so I do keto in and out, because I know you were talking about Matt and Matt's into keto. Like I'll drop in and out of keto based on my training. You know, if a really high intensity endurance week, I'll go very keto for that. I'll drop my protein right down, ramp up my fats, drop my carbs right back, just because that really helps me if I've got like, you know, a 150-mile week that I'm trying to run. So I'll drop in and out of that. And the way I was able to adjust so quickly to it was because of the experimentation with bodybuilding, because you know what it's like to feel low carb. You know, you know what it's like. You know, your brain feels it first and then your body feels it second. So I was, even in the Sahara, I could self-monitor and I could bring up my carbs based on, you know, you're clearly depleting glycogen, now you need to top it up. But also I experimented with keto and being a bit more fat adapted. So having that metabolic flexibility really helped me in those multi-endurance events. It still helps me because my body can run off fats and my body can run off carbs. So that gives me a huge advantage. I never, in all my years of running endurance events, triathlon, all these things, I've never hit the wall, you know, in the sense that people are like, you know, they bonk, where they're like, oh, I bonked, I'm gone. You know, that's never happened to me because my body's very metabolically flexible, intentionally, because I adapt my nutrition to make sure that it's fitting my training week. So when I got to the Sahara, I had those advantages. But what happened in the third night on the Sahara, so you have everything on your back, you're sleeping in kind of tents, you know, 6-man to a tent, and you're just kind of, you're roughing it basically. You've got your sleeping bag, and you're effectively just sleeping outside in the sand, and you're getting ready to run at the Sahara the next day. But what happened on the third day, the third night, I'll never forget this even till the day I die, was there was a sandstorm. So I live in the west of Ireland, like it's all green, like picture leprechauns dancing through a green field. Like I'm as country as can be. So a sandstorm came. So I'd never experienced, I'd heard of it in movies, but they're like, a sandstorm's coming, which basically is like, I want to say it's like just a storm, but it's just sand. You can't see in front of you. So it blacks out and blinds everything. So sandstorm came at nighttime. We were sleeping and they're powerful. And I remember thinking, right, I need to lie on my bag, because I'm like, if my food and equipment gets blown away, my race is over. I'm done. I'm like, this is gone. And so what happened was everybody was beside us. There was 6 men in a tent, 5 men and me. And there was this scream. There was like, right, everyone get into the bag. So what you have to do is, like, have you ever seen Kitty from South Park, where he's like hood up and he's like pulling everything close? Like, you have to do that with your sleeping bag, so that no sand can get in, because the tents get blown away. But we all had our tents covered. It was freezing at nighttime. Like, if you think about the heat during the day, it's equivalently cold at nighttime. It is freezing in the Sahara at nighttime. And the sandstorm came, so we were all locked in the bags. And then I hear this scream. I hear this like deathly scream from beside me. And it's just the guy beside me. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear. You can bleep it out. He's like, my hand. And I was like, oh God, what's after happening? And I looked out through the bag. It was the guy right beside me. Johnny was his name. And the pole that was holding down the tent had sliced through his hand. So the storm had taken the pole, sliced through, and it went right through his hand. Now, luckily, it didn't go straight through, but it sliced straight through. So there was blood everywhere. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, are you okay? Are you okay? He was like, look, I'm fine. So we all buried down. And I remember thinking, Wade, my God, I was like, if that hits me in the head, I'm dead. I'm like, if one of those poles hits me in the head, I am dead. There's no coming back from that. I'm like, it's gone through Johnny's hand. I'm like, that goes through anyone's head, they're dead. And I remember thinking, lying on my back, going, oh my God, I'm like, just please get through this. And the first night when we finished the Sahara, after the 6 back-to-back marathons, they put you into a hotel before they fly you home. And I remember being in the room with my man Simon, the guy I ran with. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm so grateful for 4 walls and a roof. I'm like, that, and that has stayed with me since. Like, that was 2018.
Right.
Those small little things. And that comes from putting yourself into a very uncomfortable situation. Now, it's an extreme example, but all of those, like, it's the same with bodybuilding. Like, how grateful are you for a morning bowl of porridge after a bodybuilding show? Like, because you can have it, you know, or a piece of ice cream after dinner. Like, it's those small things, but you only get them when you put yourself into a state of discomfort. Like, you only get it when you push that. And when I see, and I think I might have fell into this bracket, maybe it's a mirror back on me and why it affects me so much, is when I see people giving out about stupid things that aren't important, like inconveniences, not separating real problems from perceived problems. And maybe it's a mirror back on me on how I was, and that's probably why it affects me so much. But I'm like, they're not problems. Like, and it just, putting yourself into a state of discomfort, whatever that looks like for you, gives you that reference point, and you're not going to get it otherwise. But you don't have to run to the Sahara to get that. You don't have to run to the Arctic to get that. You don't have to do a bodybuilding show to get that. You can get that by getting up an hour earlier. You can get that by, fasting until lunchtime because you're, a slave to your hunger. You can get that through multiple different things. And I think it's important that people question that. As you said earlier, Tony Robbins, the power of questions. Like, what can I do today that's potentially going to make my life better that's uncomfortable? And it's like, go do that.
Beautifully said, and very, very powerful, those moments. And the human spirit and our capacity to handle discomfort is far greater than many of us even consider.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of Masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on Masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at Masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at Masszymes.com.
I want to switch gears and contrast this. You're running in the Arctic, and first off, what made you decide to go to the Arctic? Second thing, how did your Achilles rupture? And then what did you do to get through that?
So thankfully, no, it didn't rupture. My Achilles tore.
Yes.
Rupture, thank God. Because if it had ruptured, there'd have been nothing you can do. You'd have had to have been helicoptered out. On a tear, it's not advised you keep moving, but you can. So there's a slight difference on that. But in terms of signing up for it, it's a funny story. It's a very straightforward story. But what actually led me to the success in the Arctic was, again, as you know, Wade, a massive failure. That was something that I just didn't have my head right and didn't have my mindset right. So the short answer is, I'd done the Sahara, I'd done the heat. The next logical thing was, I'll do the cold now. So that was actually the thing that just led me into the Arctic. So a very straightforward, simple answer. Like, even before COVID, I was supposed to run in the Himalayas. I was supposed to run an ultra marathon, 100-miler to Everest Base Camp. So altitude was that's what I was training for. So I was heat, cold, altitude. So I'll still hopefully do that next year, provided everything goes ahead with COVID. But the Arctic was I had a little bit of a stumbling block in the lead up to the Arctic. So I signed up for a training race in Barcelona in November of 2018. So I did the Sahara, the 6 back-to-back marathons, Saab, in April 2018. And the Arctic was in February 2019. So in between, I got a lot of confidence. I built a lot of confidence. Some of it was false confidence, as I'll get to now, because I came back thinking I was invincible from the Sahara. I was like, I signed up to this ultra marathon in Barcelona, pride coming before the fall. Like, I signed up to this 76-kilometer ultra marathon in Barcelona, completely the wrong mindset. I'm like, I ran 6 back-to-back marathons in the Sahara. I was like, I can run 76 kilometers in Barcelona. I'm like, that's fine. So I didn't really train for it. I didn't have the right headspace for it. I didn't know anything about the course. I landed out to Barcelona thinking I was running a road race for 76 kilometers. It wasn't. It was a trail race, but the start of the trail race was running up Mount Tibidabo. So you're running up, and I had none of the equipment, none of the gear, nothing right for it. And 50 kilometers into that race, 40 kilometers into that race, between that 40 and 50 checkpoint, I got lost and went the wrong way. And it had been raining. It was pouring in Barcelona that whole month. The wettest autumn they had on record, or wettest winter they've had on record. And it was soaked. So I was like, went the wrong way, 40 to 50 kilometer checkpoint. I'm like, I'm out of here. I'm like, this is crap. I'm like, I'm not enjoying this. This is rubbish. I'm like, it's a crap race, crap course. I don't have anything right for it. And I'm like, I'm out. I'm like, I'm done. So tapped out, went home, got showered in the hotel, got fed. Then I was lying on my bed and I was like, you're just after tapping out and quitting that race. And I was sitting there, and that's something that hit me after. I'm like, regardless of how uncomfortable you feel, how difficult this thing is you're doing right now, there'll be a time when you're sitting on the couch watching TV with food. And you have a decision to make in the middle of that. There's going to be a time when you do feel comfortable. And that haunted me. Like for a week and a half, nobody could talk to me. I'm like, oh my God. I was like, if I go to the Arctic with this mindset, I'm going to die. I'm like, I'm literally going to one of the most inhospitable places on the planet. If I go there with this mindset that I had in Barcelona, I'm going to die. And I remember having that shift. And that's what happened when I got to the Arctic. I got out there. I was tunnel visioned. I trained. I had my mindset right. And then when my Achilles went, I was thinking of Barcelona. I'm like, this is the thing I've spent the last, 8-9 months training for. I'm like, you felt you felt horrible for quitting a race that was only a training race. If you quit the Arctic now after all this time, energy, and effort, I'm like, you're going to feel 10 times worse. There's going to be a time when you're at home with the heat turned on, with a Mars bar in your hand, watching football, watching Arsenal play Man United, and you're going to be sitting there and you have a choice now. Like, do you keep going and push through and see what the limit is? Or do you just tap out and go and just quit and say, I'm not doing this? And that's what happened in the Arctic. I got out there and I'm like, unless I had to leave in a helicopter or an ambulance, I'm like, I'm finishing this. It got to the point, I remember when my Achilles went first, I ran it with Simon, who did the Sahara with me. And we did the Arctic together. He's a detective in Dublin, and hardy guy, great guy. But when my Achilles went first, what happens in the Arctic, because there's a great photo, I'll show it to you, Wade, is what happens in the Arctic is if you're not moving quickly enough, everything freezes over. So when my Achilles went first, before I could kind of power through, before I took any painkillers or anything like that, my Achilles went, and I was going so slow, my eyelids froze over. So you have so much water in your eyes, something I would never even have thought about. My eyelids froze over, so I wasn't able to blink. So I got landed up at the tent, like the teepee with the Sami tribe, and my eyes were all bloodshot because I hadn't blinked in whatever it was, 2 or 3 kilometers, because my eyelids just completely froze over because I wasn't moving fast enough. And that was a point, that was the only point, because I remember Simon turned to me when we finished and he was like, I thought you were gone then. He goes, that's when I thought there's no chance. I'm like, you can't move, you can barely walk, your eyes are bloodshot, you can't blink, your eyelids are frozen. He's like, I thought you were gone there. But again, it's like everything, you just power through. I'm like, at some stage, you're not going to be in the Arctic. At some stage, you're going to be at home and it's going to be comfortable. Well, what do you do when times get difficult? And I think asking that question answer, that's the thing that fueled me to get through. And I'm delighted I did. I couldn't walk for 3 months when I got home. I had to rehab it out. But I'm like, I wouldn't change it for anything. I don't regret that decision one day. I think it was one of the best things I have done, because I left that with a completely different association with pain. I'm like, my body's way more, everybody has that inside them. It's just how to tap into it, and what method you use to tap into it is the difference between people.
It's so beautiful, very inspirational. And I think thank you for going into the mindset and the challenges and then how you push through that. Because I'm sure there's somebody listening right now that's going through some ungodly challenge in their life and they're looking for inspiration, and that's it. I want to switch gears and ask you, the lessons that you've learned from all of this kind of point, and that's translated, obviously you're an incredible speaker and you're very magnanimous in your energy, and I can see why you're so successful in that. How do you take those lessons and translate it into a stage career where you're performing and inspiring and doing these type of things? And how did that happen? Like what inspired you in that? And what is the ultimate message and that you're sharing with people at these events that you do?
So I kind of fell into speaking, if I'm being honest. It was never really a conscious thing that I said, all right, wait, I'm going to be a speaker. That was never the goal. Like I run an online business. I have programs, I have courses, I have the books, loads of different things. And the speaking was something I kind of fell into, where I would keep getting requests by different companies, different businesses. They'd hear my story or the podcast. They would hear, because I've documented everything on the podcast. Like I think 151 is my episode on Marathon Des Sables, talking through the entire experience. And it was the week after, so it's super fresh. And the same with the Arctic. Like I did a podcast, I think it's 219, running through the Arctic, 230 kilometers through the Arctic is the title. And this happened at a recent event before COVID. So my last speaking event, the one that I ran myself, was in December or January, before the lockdown, about 2 or 3 months before the lockdown. And I had a girl come up to me at the seminar, and she was kind of teary before she came up. So at the end of my seminars, particularly the ones I run myself, I just stay behind and meet and talk to anyone that wants to chat. Yeah, I love it. It's the best thing. Like it is the best thing ever, connecting with like-minded people like that. But a girl came up to me, Wade, and she had tears in her eyes, and she was like, I've just battled back from cancer. And I was like, whoa. She was like, your podcast from the Arctic. She goes, you said something on that podcast that I just kept listening to on repeat. And I said on the podcast, I'm like, pain is temporary. It will eventually go away. That's what I was repeating to myself in the Arctic. And she came up and she goes, I just kept re-listening to your podcast. She goes, I was struggling so much with my chemo. I just kept thinking, this will pass, this will pass, this will pass.
Wow.
And I was using those words. And I was welling up. Like there was a crowd of people behind her. I was like, I had to take a second after she went. And I remember, I was like, that inspires me more than anything I'll ever do. I'm like, when you think about that, and that makes me so grateful for the medium of podcasting and different things. But I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm like, what you've done is so much more inspiring than anything I've ever done. I'm like, that you battle through. I was like, and you wired your mindset to push through and get out the other side. And now you're here with a seminar and you're sharing that. I'm like, that's incredible. Like, so that alone, when things like that happen, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I get to do what I get to do. But just in the speaking side, like even now when I'm thinking of it, I'm like, geez, it's one of those things, one of those experiences that I'm like, oh my goodness. But the speaking side, it was businesses reaching out to me and corporate reaching out to me. They would hear the podcast like the Arctic, or they would hear podcasts like the Sahara, and they're like, look, can you just come in and talk to us about mindset, or talk to us about health and wellness or fitness or whatever it is. It's normally the mindset side, the motivational side. And to be honest, like, my speaking, the only reason I'm able to speak well is because I was a teacher for years. I'm like, and that's what you did as a teacher. I'm like, you're in front of a class, 30 kids, and you're breaking down complicated ideas into its simplest form. I'm like, that's all I do now. I'm just doing it with health, fitness, and mindset. And when you're speaking, you're doing the same thing. So I used to be terribly stage fright. I used to have terrible stage fright, like public speaking. The old adage, the number one fear of the world is public speaking. Number 2 is death, and like number 3, dying from public speaking. Like that's how I was. I was terrified of it earlier in my life. And then as I became a teacher, it forces you to speak in front of people. You're speaking in front of other teachers, either explaining what you're doing for lesson plans, or you're speaking in front of kids, and you just get better at that. So then when I got brought in to do corporate talks and do different speaking, it was kind of natural. Like I do very little prep on any speaking that I do. The same as right before we went on air. I love you were the same when you were on mine. I'm like, cool. I was like, let's just rock with it. Like I was like, ask me anything, and it's the same with speaking. I just kind of go up, I try and feed off the room on what's going to land, what's going to connect. And sometimes you're just telling some stories. And that's the thing that's bringing people, because people connect with those stories. That's why I tell them, because everyone has a version of something difficult that's going on in their life. Everybody has a version of pain is temporary, it will go away, just keep on pushing through. Like it might be a relationship, it might be a job, it might be the COVID condition, it might be, you know, physical or mental or health or wellness or whatever it is. But everyone has a version of that. So people are connecting with it. And I think that's why, again, I won't say I've been successful with it. Like that's a super subjective term. But in terms of the opportunities that I've got in terms of speaking, you know, I've spoken in front of Google headquarters. I've done SAP. I've done loads of different corporate events that are massive ones I would have never have dreamed of doing years ago. But to be honest, as I said, I kind of fell into it, Wade.
I think that there's a really interesting bridge here because, you know, many of the people who are listening to this are, maybe they have a dream that they want to go for in life. Maybe they're in the fitness industry themselves and they're looking something, or they're trying to build a business. And I find it fascinating that these ginormous companies who influence the world are bringing in someone to explain to their staff members of how to have the mindset to endure through difficult things. Because building a business, oftentimes you have to endure difficult things. Your own stories like that, I can relate to that. Every business person I've ever met or talked to have talked about having that vision and being able to push through the difficult times of the things. What do you think these executives are trying to communicate to their staff members in that bridging gap? Like, what do you think it is, like, that brings you into that thing? Why do they want you to talk to the people on those items?
I think it's a combination of two things. The first thing that I started to notice was a trend when I was getting approached by corporations to come and do mindset talks. And that was that everybody goes through difficult times, but when it's you that's going through that difficult time, you think you're in a bubble and you think you're the only one. Mm-hmm. And that was a common trend that I found with people, particularly with, say, Google, SAP, these big, whether they're working to deadlines, they're doing crazy hard tasks and they're working long hours, and they can get into a bubble that life is so difficult. They're so tunnel vision on what they're doing. They don't see that there's loads of other struggles out there and that others are struggling. So what I found was, as I shared some of my personal struggles, it automatically would snap them out of it. They go, oh, hold on. We're all in this. We all have struggles. We all find things difficult. It's not just me in this bubble. And that was one thing that I noticed. That was a trend that kept coming back. The second thing that I noticed, particularly with the bigger corporations, was, for the lack of a better way of putting this, as you said earlier, people struggle to push themselves into something that's really uncomfortable, or they struggle to exercise that self-discipline muscle. They kind of they're what I call living life on autopilot. They're just kind of going through and just on autopilot. They're not really thinking about things. And sometimes when somebody comes in and starts throwing information in your face about, you know, you will be better and your life will be better if you do difficult things, whether that's getting up an hour earlier when you know you want to stay in bed, or whether that's getting to the gym when you know you're tired and you've had a 12-hour day, but your life will be significantly better if you go for that run or you get in for that workout. And it shifts that mindset into, because in those corporations, and I can only speak from my experience, but in those corporations, a lot of the people working, not all, because I would be generalizing, but a large portion, it's one of the reasons I get brought in, is they see things like getting up earlier, working out, difficult, and it's not going to enhance their life. It's like, that's difficult, I'm not going to do that. As opposed to, this thing is difficult, it's going to make me mentally stronger, and it's going to make my entire life easier. And I think it's pointing that out to people, because it's quite obvious when you say it. You're like, you know, successful people do what they have to do whether they feel like it or not. And you're doing things that move your life forward in a positive way. You're not letting emotions dictate that. And I think all I'm doing a lot of the time is just pointing that out to people. And I think that's why it's connected. It doesn't always, you're not going to connect with everybody, but the feedback I've got has always been mostly positive for that reason. You're pointing things out that people kind of half know themselves, and it's practical. Like, get up an hour earlier, go to the gym. I'm like, there are two things you can do. Most people can do. If you're not doing right now, and your life quality would probably be enhanced because of it. And sometimes all you need is that pointed out to you.
Beautifully said. Let's talk a little bit about what your website, what you're currently offering, and some of your fitness programs. And I know people from all around the world are, looking to hire you and stuff. So can you share about what you do as a coach and what's the type of person that hires you and what that process is for what you're carrying on in your career right now?
So I love what I do, Wade. That line my mom asked me, what would you do for free, is still the philosophy I have when it comes to business. Like every program I design, any course I create, any books that I do, it's all off, would you do this for free? And that's why that's why I love what I do so much. So I've got like different programs that cut across different things. Some things are good fit for some people. I'm a big believer that square pegs fit in square holes and square pegs don't fit in round holes. I think I'm an amazing fit for some people, but that equally makes me a terrible fit for others. I'm like, there's somebody out there, you're brilliant with this with the supplements. Like, if you're looking for high quality supplements, good probiotic and digestive enzymes, like, yeah, Bioptimizers, like you're going to get what you pay for with that. Whereas if you're like, nah, I just want the cheapest thing, I'm like, well, that's not who you're going to serve. So the square peg and the square hole. And my programs, working with people, like I work with people on body composition mostly. Like that's my bread and butter, weight loss, fat loss. Like that's what I love doing. Even though I do all these ultra endurance events, I don't train people for that. I send them to other coaches. I'm not the best fit for that. I'm like, I do it myself because of the personal growth and the mental toughness that it gives me. But it's not my it's not my circle of competence for one, but it's not also my area of passion either. So I serve people within that body composition. My mindset side is like my courses and books are all mindset based. So everything I've talked about, the building self-discipline, taking responsibility and owning things and not letting your own biggest enemy live between your two ears, like having the courage to not worry what everybody thinks so that you can go after the things that you want, getting your ladder up against the right wall and making sure that you're climbing that ladder consistently and enjoying the process. Like all those things, they're down to books, they're down to courses. And again, that connects really well with some people and other people it doesn't. Like if you're someone that loves The Secret and wants to just sit at home, law of attraction and hope it all comes, I'm like, I'm not your fit. I'm definitely not your fit. Like I'm going to say, yeah, law of attraction and think positively and the universe will conspire to give you everything you want, but you have to put in fucking work as well. I'm like, you need to get off and do it. Like that's my belief system and that's my approach to things. So again, it makes it a great fit for some people and a terrible fit for others. But again, I'll continue to do everything I do. The courses, programs, books are all based on how can I serve? That one of my mentors used to always tell me, I used to deal and handle really bad with anxiety. So like my 800-pound gorilla in my room was anxiety, that like constant stage, like type A's have it sometimes because you're constantly go, which is great. And you get a lot of like outward success as a result of that because you're quite a high achiever, but that's normally fueled by a lot of anxiety. Like what I used to always think was outward success fueled by inner turmoil. I'm like, that's what it was running on. That was the gasoline it was running on. And one of my mentors used to always tell me that you'll find yourself when you lose yourself in the service of others. So I try and live my life by that. And that's what I do on my social media platforms, what I try and do on my podcast. When you're coming on, providing a load of value on gut health and digestion, like serving the people that are following me, serving my audience and keeping that the focus and just rinsing and repeating that. As long as I would keep doing what I'm doing for free, I'm like, I have nothing that I would change in anything I do in my business.
Beautiful said. A couple quick questions I'm going to ask, just kind of rapid fire stuff. So what's your favorite diet food?
Diet food?
Yeah.
Broccoli. I love broccoli.
Favorite cheat food or guilty pleasure?
Oh, chocolate. I'm a chocolate and ice cream guy. I lost the savory tooth completely and I got all the sweet teeth.
Any brands in particular?
I used to be all about the Ben and Jerry's. I was all about Ben and Jerry's, but now I'm on a kind of a green and blacks phase, like their butterscotch and white chocolate. My God, they're good.
Right. Most influential book?
Ooh, that's a great one. I'm a big reader. Like I'm a big reader.
I see all the books in the background, so I wanted to ask.
That's only a handful. I've got probably 400 or 500 books in my library. I'm a big reader.
You can use a few if you want.
So probably there's been a couple that have a huge influence on my life. One was Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning.
Great book. Great book.
Fantastic book. Like that's one of the only books that I generally don't have to ask context to recommend it to people. Generally, when people say, what books do you recommend? I'm like, well, tell me where you need help with. I'm like, it's like, what training program should I do? I'm like, well, are you trying to run a marathon or are you trying to do a bodybuilding show? I'm like, because the training program is going to be different. Like the book recommendations are similar. But A Man's Search for Meaning is the one that, when I read that, I remember thinking, oh my God, you have nothing to complain about. I'm like, you can't give out about life. So that was one that had a hugely positive impact on me. And another one, which is a funny one, but I'll say it because it was the one that gave me that mindset shift that I needed, that changed the entire trajectory of my life. And that was Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah, another great book.
A great book. Like that book, I remember I was working, I'll never forget where I was at. Like I was working in London. I had been 2 years working as a personal trainer at nighttime. I was getting the bus to and from work. And I remember I listened to that whole book, the audio book on Audible on the commute. And that was September, October of 2013. And I left my job that December. I'm like, that book gave me so much. I'm like, oh my God. I was like, this is what I need to do. I'm like, and it's weird because it was a mindset shift, and that book's about real estate and mindset and finance, but it was the one that I was like a dynamite or a piece of TNT, and that book was the lighter fluid, the thing that set it off for me. So they're probably the two that have had the most impact on me for sure.
Great. Most influential person in your life, either in the present or in the past, like could be a figure, person, public speaker, family member, anything.
Oh, my mum by a country mile. Yeah, there's my mum, and then there's everybody else. Biggest influence on me was the reason I made the jump. It was the reason I had the courage to make the jump in the first place. Was the one that told me to follow the thing I was passionate about. That easiest question I'll ever answer. Great
stuff. Last question. How would you like to see your life? So you're at the last day of the life and you're looking backwards. How would you like to be remembered in life?
As someone that had the courage to go after the things that they were passionate about.
Beautifully said. This is a great interview. I love it. You got so much energy and passion. I just feel like it could go on forever. Can you share with our listeners of where they can find you, where they can connect with you, find out more, follow your podcast? I think everybody needs to listen to these raw and real running in the desert and running in the Arctic when you're in the struggle. I mean, there's an essence and an energy that you cannot manufacture in an interview when you're doing that. So can you give us all the handles of where to reach and where to find you?
And firstly, Wade, thanks so much for having me on. Like, again, I loved our conversations. Our first round on my podcast, this round here. I feel so fired up after it. So thank you. For people that want to check out my stuff, the podcast for sure. Like, that's my bread and butter. The thing I absolutely, outside of the speaking, when I'm running my events, the podcast is my favorite thing that I do. As I said, that's where we got to connect originally. And I love the conversations I have on there. So the Brian Keane podcast, and then I'm Brian Keane Fitness across everything else. I'm on all the social media platforms, and BrianKeaneFitness.com is the website too.
What a tremendous interview. You are a force of nature and, very inspiring. And thank you so much for sharing and really unveiling the deep aspects of psychology and how you can push through the challenging points and inspire others. You're an amazing person, an amazing man, and I'm grateful for you to take the time. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. And for all our listeners, make sure you check out Brian Keane's stuff. I think it's really great to dive into this. If you're going through struggles, Brian's your man. You want to connect in and really feel what it's like to be in the middle of the darkness and push through it and come out the other side. And, as you can hear his energy, he's earned that effulgent kind of nature and energy. And so you can do it too. For everyone else, I want to say thank you for joining us for another awesome health podcast by Bioptimizers. We'll see you very soon on a very next expert. Thank you.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: how to get away with eating sugar. Hey, look, sugar is normally one of the worst things for you. But let's be honest. I mean, we all cheat from time to time. And here's a little trick that will ensure your body benefits from the sugar. Now, before you eat or drink anything sweet, take 5 to 8 capsules of P3OM. The patented strain in the formula devours sugar so fast it literally doubles in the body every 20 minutes in the presence of sugar. That doesn't mean that you can or you should eat a bunch of sugar or sit around all day doing that. But on the days that you do cheat, or you go after one of those maybe meals that you wouldn't normally do, this ensures that you get something in your gut that eats the sugar. And it's not going to feed the bad guys or spike your blood glucose nearly as much. So to learn more about P3OM and its sugar-devouring and protein-digesting properties and how it can transform your gut and metabolism, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.